Welcome back to Table Talk and Tumbleweeds, our Lent of the Rings meditation, which we've been doing for Lent. Lent is now officially over. This is the Monday after Easter is when we're posting this. So I think that our theme today, if theme there is after the end.
Yeah.
What to do? It's done, right? Good Friday, Jesus says words from the cross. It is finished, and yet Easter morning we have the resurrection. So the end has come, and now
Now what?
Now what? Frodo's destroyed the ring. There's 100 pages left. What can he possibly talk about in 100 pages? And this idea of after the end was the kind of the theme that we've kind of focused on. And for me, that prompted thinking about a book by James Berger called After the End. It's an academic book, but what he does in the book is he examines apocalyptic ideas in literature, focusing on America. And he talks about them as ways of dealing with historical trauma, which I found sort of interesting when I was reflecting on it, because we started this discussion about how this book,
Yep.
right, is in
It
some
grows
ways...
out of
Yes.
his own personal trauma in World War I,
Yes.
the social trauma of World War II, and then where do we go from there?
Yes, so in some ways, Lord of the Rings is apocalyptic literature, right? It is dealing
Okay.
with trauma, right?
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things that Berger says about an apocalypse, we think of an apocalypse, and we talked about this a lot,
Watch the Advent ones, which we'll link here below.
but also look at the Pentecost ones. We talk about it a little bit.
Yes.
It's a theme for us, right? That an apocalypse, we think of an apocalypse as it's wiped out. The end. This is a brand new beginning. But the apocalypse doesn't just wipe out the old world, right? The trauma stays with us. That's Berger. But you could also say there are bits and pieces of the old world that we bring into the new world.
The new world has to be born out of the ashes of the new.
Yes, and so there are ashes,
Yes.
right? And of course, the song that's in my head is Now the Green Blade Rises, right? The green blade doesn't rise out of nothing. Usually, and this is an image that we use in Advent, that the dead tree,
Yep.
there are things that grow out of it. But that dead tree is necessary for the new growth. So Berger says there's always something left, and he describes it as a combination of a paradise. Apocalyptic literature is like this tension between paradise and wasteland. So anyway, I don't need to go too much further down that way, but we thought about this in terms of two things. This is it's not the scars left behind; it's the scars we bring with us,
Yeah.
right? The scars that remain.
Yeah.
Frodo's runes and the scouring of the Shire, which in many ways are really textbook illustrations of what Berger is talking about.
Yeah. So everything is over, everything is ended. We got rid of the ring, and that's where most places would actually end the stories.
Yep.
And this is the thing I've noticed, and this is my own. But if you've watched any movies made in the last 15 years, the climax is about 30 seconds before the credits roll. There is no actual ending to it to say, okay, now what? And we've gotten very used to this idea that once everything has been sealed up, we're done.
Yeah.
And that's not what he does here. It's very, very specific. He says, okay, now what happens with Frodo with his missing finger? Now what happens when they return home to the Shire? Now what happens when Frodo, who has been wounded by his proximity to the ring,
Yeah.
has to decide, what do I do to keep on living?
Yeah. So I guess this is where maybe Tolkien and the Gospels really differ. Although, you could sort of say the Gospels, they end and you're looking at it, there's 100 more pages, right? Because after the Gospels, you have the book of Acts,
Yes.
you have, which is a continuation of the Gospel of Luke.
Yep.
And then you have all of the letters of Paul, you have Revelation. So in many ways, when we talk about what comes after, we are talking about the last 100 pages of Lord of the Rings, but we're also talking about the last 100 pages, and I'm speaking metaphorically, of Scripture,
Yes.
right? That, the end has come. And of course, you could sort of, in terms of the Gospels themselves, there are different things that they talk about what happens, but certainly in terms of the shape of the Bible, what comes after is also important, especially those letters of Paul. So Frodo's wounds,
Yeah.
right? Frodo, and I think there's a sense in which, when I was reflecting on Frodo's wounds, right? He's got, he's physically and mentally scarred.
Yes.
And again, this reflects the experiences of soldiers in the First World War. He has what we might say is a kind of PTSD, right? And there's the scene, and I hope I wrote it in here. Yeah, one evening. So this is after they've returned. One evening, Sam came into the study and found his master looking very strange. He was pale, and his eyes seemed to see things far away. "What's the matter, Mr. Frodo?" said Sam. "I am wounded," he answered. "Wounded. It will never really heal." But then he got up. The turn seemed to pass, and he was himself the next day. It was not until afterwards that Sam recalled that the date was October 6th. 2 years before that, on that day, it was dark in the dell under Weathertop. So what Frodo is experiencing is the anniversary of the stabbing.
Yeah, the Nazgul blade when he was first truly injured in the course of the story.
Yes.
It's not the last of his injuries.
Yes. So Frodo has been touched by violence and evil in a way that if it was just the physical wounds, that would be fine. These are spiritual, emotional wounds, PTSD. He has experienced this deep trauma of the weight of the ring. I mean, but it's not just Frodo, of course, right? So this is the Shire.
This is a whole community that has also experienced trauma in the Scouring of the Shire, which is one of the texts. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it's the entire community and the Fellowship and everybody else has been through this incredibly traumatic event. So now what do? We expected we weren't even going to live through this.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
We expected the apocalypse was going to come, the catastrophe was going to happen, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore because we were going to be dead. And then we ended up having to keep living.
I mean, this is that really surprising turn that happens in that after the end. You know, you kind of expect the weddings.
Oh yeah.
You know, and they sort of wander home, and on the way home they see Saruman.
Sure.
Who's, you know, and
He's very grumpy.
He's very grumpy, and they're sort of like, you know, get out of here. And then they, you know, wander their way home. They stop in Bree, and it's like
Stop in Rivendell.
Yeah, they, you know, hang out in Rivendell for a while. They stop in Bree, but then they get home, and the Shire has been taken over by Sharky, who turns out to be Saruman.
Yeah, Sharky is apparently a black speech word for old man, and he doesn't realize it. Which is one last indignity on the poor man, Saruman, because everyone's calling him the old guy, and he thinks of it as a term of endearment.
Yeah, so they come back, but I mean, it's worth noting that this isn't something that Saruman did after he met him. This is something that Saruman has been plotting. It's been his back door since the beginning.
Which is why there was all that pipeweed in the tower.
Yes, because he also developed an affection for pipeweed and couldn't tell Gandalf because he'd been teasing Gandalf about it for so long. So they come back to the Shire, and the Shire has become industrialized, right? This is
which to Tolkien would be the absolute indignity of it all. This is not what this good, pleasant land is supposed to look like.
Yes, it's become industrialized. It's been taken over by a bunch of ruffians, literally ruffians. Taken over a bunch of ruffians, tough guys. They've torn up the party tree. They've plowed up all the fields. I mean, this is, you know, they paved paradise.
Yeah, there's a roughly contemporary piece of modern art, which I'll have to link below, and I'll put the title of it down there, of a man who's depicted Jesus crucified in this industrialized Britain. And it shows him on the industrial towers.
Yes.
And it's very much that experience of what have we done to this place?
Yeah, and this is obviously a big theme in literature, and it's a big thing for Tolkien, again, growing up in the English countryside, experiencing the horrors of industrialization, and then coming home to an increasingly industrialized England. In both of these instances, you have a physical person who bears the wounds of what happened before,
Right.
but also a community that bears the wounds
Yeah.
of what happened before. And, I mean, you and I, we both really see connections with the Easter story.
The most obvious connection is that this is what happens with the wounds of Jesus that remain after his resurrection, and then the wounds of the community, who are not just terrified about everything that's happened, rejoicing about the resurrection, but then end up bearing the wounds, right?
Yes.
Persecution happens early, happens quickly, and they are scattered so swiftly.
Yeah, I mean, they're scattered even before the resurrection.
Right.
When Jesus is resurrected, right, the you know, you have Peter going, I don't even know the guy, and he slinks off, and all the apostles are going their different ways because they are all of a
At the
sudden,
arrest, they all scatter.
they're a terrorist group,
Yeah.
right? And so they have to go in hiding because the Roman authorities are looking for them, and that's why the Romans have sealed up the tomb. They have set a guard at the tomb. So this is, and so I think there are parallels with the way they discuss the Shire and the Christian community at the time. I mean, it's not really a Christian community. It's the seeds of the Christian community. These are the followers of Christ who will become the Christian community once they witness the resurrection. So you have the scene of Thomas,
Right?
demanding to look at the, you know, the wounds are kind of proof, they're evidence, they're witness.
Well, and again, this is Robert Smith, professor at PLS, argues that he doesn't want to see the wounds because he doesn't believe it didn't happen. What he wants to see is he wants to see the wounds to believe that this is still the same Jesus who he knew and loved.
Right.
Because he trusts without those wounds, everything we did in the past doesn't matter anymore. But if he carries those wounds, then this is still the Jesus who loved me. This is still the Jesus who will love me and will love my fragile, broken, sinful body.
Yeah. And I think that's like sort of an important, I want to add an important caveat to that, because it's important to say, this is the same Jesus. This is not some sort of mystical returning who's not you know, who doesn't remember anything happened before. This is the same Jesus, and the wounds are testament to that.
Yeah.
And yet, and this is where Berger comes back in, right? Because it's not either or, it's both and. If you will excuse my my reference there, you know, with Thomas, it's a good time to remind ourselves that the resurrection does not reverse the crucifixion, right? The wounds are still there.
Exactly so.
But Jesus is changed. It's not, the old world does not just come in, unchanged into the new world. And this is,
the community comes in changed as well.
Yes, and we know this because Mary, one of his closest confidants, is sitting there, and she walks up to him, and she's like, "Well, who are you? Yeah, are you the gardener?
To be the gardener.
Yeah, are you the gardener?" And she doesn't recognize him. So this is identifiably Jesus because we see the wounds, and yet there's something else. We don't quite recognize him. And this, there are several appearances like this in this gospel, right? In which
Even across the Gospels, because in Luke's Gospel, they don't recognize him on the road to Emmaus.
on the road to Emmaus, right? Until this was always the scene until he kind of goes like this, and they're like, "Wait a minute, I've seen that gesture before, right?" Yeah. So this is Jesus. We know it's Jesus, and yet there must have been something different about him. And I think this is a good metaphor for not a metaphor. I mean, but this can be used as a metaphor for thinking about how we think about our task as Christians, right? Because what comes next bears with it the scars of what came before, and yet it's something new. It might be worth bringing up one other element, which is this, you know, the happily ever after, right? And they lived happily ever after, right? Which is not the ending, right?
No.
And Berger talks about utopianism as a way to escape the scars.
Right.
And the scars are what tell us that this is not utopianism. The death and the suffering were real for Frodo, and also, of course, for Jesus, right? And so, you know, we have Frodo sort of unable to heal in the Shire, and so he goes off to the Undying Lands. And I think there's, you know, and Jesus, of course, the ascension of Jesus. And I think there's a temptation to say, "Ooh, well, that's taken care of, right?
All done.
You know, it's all done." And this is why, I mean, as Christians, we really have to emphasize what comes after the end.
Because the trauma continues to happen.
Yes.
The pain and destruction continues to happen. And so what do we do after that? How do we relive our lives? How do we continue in a world where trauma has affected not just the scapegoat, but all of us?
All of us. How do we rebuild a world that's not the old one, right? And so I think this is
The dangerous temptation.
Oh, it's a dangerous temptation because the old one was easier in some ways. So anyway, I mean, I think that this is you know, what comes after the end, and I think both Tolkien and the Easter story really resist clean endings, right?
Yeah.
You know, the stone is rolled away.
Simple answers are not for us.
Yeah, the ring is destroyed. The stone is rolled away.
All done.
And yet we have 100 pages left. Right, so that begs the question: what now? What do we do now?
Yeah.
And I think that's something we can cover in the next video, which is coming up next.